Picture this: a forgotten battlefield, buried beneath 7 centuries of accumulated dust, debris, and the slow creep of alien vegetation. The soil here has long since absorbed the spilled blood and promethium of warriors who fell when the current Imperium was still young. The air hangs thick with silence, broken only by the occasional settling of ancient rubble or the skittering of some mindless creature that has made this graveyard its home. Then, that silence shatters. The unmistakable cacophony of orc voices rolls across the wasteland like thunder, rough, guttural, filled with the kind of enthusiasm that can only come from creatures whose entire existence revolves around finding bigger guns and better fights. A warband of greenskins has stumbled upon this place, drawn perhaps by rumors of dead Yumi gubbins, or simply by the blind luck that seems to guide orcs to the most valuable scrap in any given sector. They don't know it yet, but they've found something far more valuable than a few rusted bolters or stripped tank chassis. Buried beneath 20 feet of collapsed ferrocrete and twisted adamantium support beams lies a dreadnought. Not just any dreadnought, but an ancient one. A venerable warrior who has been sealed in stasis sleep for exactly 777 years. 777 years is an eternity by most standards. Entire civilizations have risen and fallen in less time. The Imperium has fought and won countless wars, lost uncountable billions of souls, and seen Lord Commanders come and go. Technology has advanced or regressed, depending on which sector you're discussing. Chapters of Space Marines have been founded, have fought with honor, and have been erased from history. But for the consciousness sealed within that armored sarcophagus, time has had no meaning. The pilot within has experienced nothing. No dreams, no awareness, no sense of the centuries flowing past like water. The last thing this warrior knew was the preparation ritual, the cold touch of the amniotic fluid filling lungs that could no longer breathe air, the final connection of neural interfaces, and then darkness. A darkness so complete, it might as well have been death itself. Until today. The orcs are getting closer now, their crude digging equipment tearing through the rubble with the kind of enthusiastic destruction that only greenskins can muster. They're looking for anything useful, anything they can loot, anything they can repurpose into the ramshackle war machines that somehow, impossibly, function despite all logic and reason. What they're about to find is something that will change everything, not just for this particular warband, but potentially for the entire sector. Because when you wake a warrior who has been sleeping for 777 years, you don't just get a soldier, you get a living relic of a bygone age, a consciousness that last drew breath in a galaxy that was subtly but profoundly different from the one that exists now. And when that warrior wakes to find himself surrounded by Xenos, the galaxy's oldest enemies, his response will be immediate. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we can understand what happens in this moment, we need to understand what a dreadnought truly is. We need to comprehend the nature of the consciousness sealed within, the horror and glory of their existence. We need to grasp the orc mentality, their relationship with technology, and their natural response when they encounter something they don't understand but might be able to use. This is the story of what happens when the unstoppable force of orc curiosity meets the immovable object of space marine determination. It's a tale of ancient warriors and savage scavengers, of technology that shouldn't work battling technology that has endured for millennia, of consciousness returning after an absence measured in centuries. It's a story that begins with a simple question. What do you do when you wake up and everything has changed? Understanding dreadnoughts, the walking tombs. To truly comprehend the horror and majesty of what the orcs are about to uncover, we must first understand what a dreadnought actually is. These towering war machines are among the most iconic and tragic creations in the entire Imperium of man. They represent both the absolute pinnacle of devotion to duty and the darkest possible fate for a space marine warrior. A dreadnought is not simply a vehicle or a suit of armor. It's not a tank with a pilot inside, nor is it a robot controlled by remote commands. A dreadnought is a sarcophagus, a tomb, a life support system, and a weapons platform, all wrapped into one towering, ceramite-plated package that stands roughly 4 to 5 meters tall, though some patterns can exceed 6 meters in height. To put that in perspective, imagine a walking war machine twice as tall as a basketball hoop, bristling with enough firepower to level a city block. But the true nature of a dreadnought isn't found in its armor thickness or weapon loadouts. The truth lies in what's at its core: a Space Marine warrior whose body has been so catastrophically damaged that even the incredible regenerative capabilities and bionic augmentations of the Adeptus Astartes cannot save him. These are heroes who have been mortally wounded, their bodies shattered beyond any hope of conventional recovery, yet whose minds, skills, and warrior spirits are deemed too valuable to lose. The process of interring a warrior into a dreadnought is not something undertaken lightly. It's a lengthy, invasive, and agonizing procedure that requires the combined expertise of the chapter's apothecaries, tech marines, and sometimes even chaplains. The warrior's ruined body is essentially reduced to its most essential components: the brain, some vital organs, perhaps a fragment of the spinal column. All unnecessary tissue is removed. All non-critical systems are eliminated. What remains is sealed in an amniotic tank, suspended in thick, oil-like fluid that sustains what little flesh remains. This organic core is then hardwired directly into the dreadnought chassis through a complex series of neural interfaces. The warrior's nervous system is literally fused with the machine. His sense of touch becomes the pressure sensors on the armor plating. His eyes become the targeting arrays and optical systems. His arms become the massive weapons mounted on the dreadnought's frame. Every movement, every sensation, every input is filtered through this cybernetic connection. The psychological toll of this transformation cannot be overstated. Imagine waking up to discover that you no longer have a body in any meaningful sense. Your lungs are filled with freezing fluid. You cannot feel your fingers or toes because you no longer have them. You cannot taste food or smell the air. Your entire sensory experience of the universe has been replaced by data feeds, targeting, solutions, and system diagnostics. You are trapped within an armored shell, conscious and aware, but fundamentally disconnected from everything that once made you human. This is why dreadnoughts spend so much time in stasis. The mental strain of existing in this state is immense. Extended periods of consciousness lead to confusion, disorientation, memory loss, and eventually madness. The amniotic fluid may sustain the body, but the psychic isolation can destroy the mind. Different chapters handle this differently. Some dreadnoughts are awakened only for the most crucial battles. Others remain dormant for decades or even centuries at a time, stirring only when their specific expertise or counsel is required. The most ancient of these warriors are known as venerable dreadnoughts. These are beings who have existed in this half-life for hundreds or even thousands of years. Their memories stretch back to the founding of their chapters, to battles that have passed into legend, to an age when the Imperium was younger and perhaps stronger. They are walking repositories of tactical knowledge, strategic wisdom, and combat experience that spans millennia. But with that age comes loss. Each awakening takes its toll. Memories fade. Connections to former comrades are severed by the simple passage of time. The names and faces of brothers in arms blur and disappear. Even the memory of what it felt like to be fully human grows dim and distant. Some dreadnoughts, like Bjorn the Fell-Handed of the Space Wolves, manage to retain their identity and sanity across 10,000 years of service. Others lose themselves entirely, becoming little more than weapons with the ghost of consciousness directing them. The technology that creates and maintains these war machines is itself ancient beyond measure. The oldest dreadnought patterns date back to the Age of Strife. to a time before the Emperor walked among men. The art of constructing new dreadnoughts has been partially lost, with only the most skilled tech marines capable of building or maintaining them. Each dreadnought is a precious relic, irreplaceable in the truest sense. When a dreadnought is destroyed in battle, the chapter will fight with desperate ferocity to retrieve the armored shell and return the fallen warrior to their fortress monastery for proper burial. Different patterns of dreadnought exist, each with its own characteristics and capabilities. The Castroferrum pattern, particularly the Mark V variant, is the most common in the current era. These are the blocky, angular war machines that most Imperial citizens would recognize, assuming they survived an encounter long enough to identify what they'd seen. The Contemptor pattern, dating back to the Great Crusade, is larger and more sophisticated, but incredibly rare in the 41st millennium. The Leviathan pattern, massive siege engines that tower over other dreadnoughts, are even rarer and more precious. Each dreadnought is armed according to its role and the preferences of its chapter. A typical loadout might include an assault cannon or twin-linked lascannon on one arm, paired with a power fist or dreadnought close combat weapon on the other. Some carry heavy flamers, missile launchers, or plasma cannons. The weapons vary, but the principle remains the same. These machines are designed to be self-contained arsenals, capable of engaging any threat from heavily armored vehicles to massed infantry. The armor itself is formidable. Layers of ceramite and adamantium plating make dreadnoughts incredibly resistant to damage. They can shrug off hits that would vaporize ordinary soldiers. They can wade through fire that would melt lesser vehicles. They can endure in environments that would kill anything organic. This durability, combined with their firepower and the tactical expertise of their pilots, makes them among the most formidable units on any battlefield. But perhaps the most important aspect of a dreadnought isn't its weapons or armor. It's the warrior inside. These are not ordinary space marines. These are heroes, chosen from among the greatest warriors a chapter has ever produced. They are captains who led hundreds of battles, sergeants whose tactical genius saved entire companies, veterans whose names are spoken with reverence. To be interred in a dreadnought is considered an honor, but it's an honor born of tragedy. It means you were too valuable to lose, too skilled to replace, too decorated to allow to die. And for 777 years, one such warrior has been sleeping, sealed in stasis, consciousness suppressed, suspended in a state that is neither life nor death. The galaxy has turned, wars have been fought, empires have risen and fallen. But within that armored shell, time has stood still, until now, until the moment when orc digging equipment tears through the last layer of rubble and exposes the ancient war machine to light for the first time in nearly 8 centuries. Orcs don't know what they've found yet. They see only a large metal box covered in strange symbols, perhaps another piece of valuable scrap to be looted and repurposed. They're about to learn otherwise. The nature of stasis, 777 years. 777 years. The number itself carries a certain weight, doesn't it? 3 sevens. In many human cultures, 7 is a number of completion, of perfection, of divine significance. Whether the warrior sealed within that dreadnought sarcophagus was interred on this date deliberately, or whether it's merely coincidence, is a question for chapter historians and remembrancers. But the significance remains. To understand what 777 years of stasis truly means, we need to consider what stasis actually is. This isn't sleep in any conventional sense. When a dreadnought enters stasis, the entire life support system enters a state of minimal function. The amniotic fluid is chemically altered to induce a form of suspended animation. The neural interfaces are shut down to the barest trickle of activity, just enough to maintain the connection between organic tissue and machine systems. The consciousness of the pilot is suppressed to the point of non-existence. There are no dreams in stasis, no awareness of time passing, no sensation whatsoever. It's the closest thing to true death that a living being can experience while still technically alive. The Dreadnought pilot simply ceases to exist as a conscious entity, preserved in a state where biological decay is halted, where neural pathways remain intact but dormant, where the very concept of self is temporarily erased. From the pilot's perspective, there is literally no difference between being in stasis for a day, a year, a century, or a millennium. The experience, or lack thereof, is identical. You are prepared for stasis, the system shut down, and then instantly, from your point of view, you are being awakened again. There is no sense of time having passed. No dreams to provide even the illusion of temporal flow. Just a discontinuity in consciousness, a gap in existence that your mind cannot comprehend or process. Now imagine waking from that state and learning that 777 years have passed, nearly 8 centuries. Imagine trying to grasp that concept when, from your perspective, you were fighting on this battlefield just moments ago. Your chapter master, the one who blessed your interment and promised to awaken you when you were needed again, has been dead for centuries. Your battle brothers, the warriors you fought alongside, the friends you made over decades or centuries of service, are all gone. Even their gene seed has likely been harvested and used to create new generations of space marines who never knew you existed. The fortress monastery you called home has been rebuilt, modified, perhaps even destroyed and reconstructed. The Imperium itself has changed in ways both subtle and profound. Wars you've never heard of have been fought and won or lost. Entire sectors have been conquered or reclaimed. Technology has advanced in some areas and regressed in others. The political landscape has shifted. New threats have emerged. Old enemies have adapted. And you know none of this. You have no context for any of it. The last thing you remember is fighting on this world, in this place, against enemies whose nature you can no longer quite recall. You remember preparing for stasis, the cold embrace of the amniotic fluid, the final shutdown of your sensory inputs. And then, nothing. An instantaneous gap in time that somehow contains nearly 8 centuries. This temporal discontinuity is one of the most psychologically devastating aspects of Dreadnought existence. The human mind, even the enhanced, conditioned mind of a space marine, is not designed to cope with such radical disconnection from temporal flow. We are creatures who exist within time, who experience it as a constant, unbroken stream. Our memories are organized temporally. Our sense of self is built on a continuous narrative of experiences, stretching from birth to the present moment. But for a Dreadnought, that narrative is full of enormous gaps. You fight a battle, enter stasis, and wake to discover decades have passed. You fight another battle, return to stasis, wake again. Each awakening brings the shock of discovering how much time has been lost, how much has changed, how many people you knew are now gone. Eventually, the gaps begin to outnumber the periods of consciousness. You've been asleep more than you've been awake. Your existence becomes a series of disconnected moments separated by vast chasms of non-experience. This is why many Dreadnoughts, especially the most ancient, seem distant or detached when they speak. It's not just the mechanical distortion of their synthesized voices. It's the psychological distance created by existing outside normal temporal flow. When you've experienced time as a series of jumps rather than a continuous stream, when everyone and everything you once knew has been left behind in the gaps, it becomes difficult to maintain emotional connections to the present moment. 777 years is a particularly long period for a single stasis cycle, even by Dreadnought standards. Most venerable Dreadnoughts are awakened more frequently, at least once every century or so, for important battles or to provide counsel on crucial decisions. A gap this long suggests something unusual happened. Perhaps the Dreadnought was severely damaged in the battle that led to this stasis. and the chapter lacked the resources to repair it immediately. Perhaps the world where it was stationed was cut off from the rest of the Imperium by warp storms or enemy incursions. Perhaps the Dreadnought was deliberately placed in long-term storage for reasons known only to the chapter's leadership. Or perhaps, most tragic of all, it was simply forgotten. In the chaos and fury of the Imperium's endless wars, with records lost or corrupted, with tech marines killed before they could pass on their knowledge, with fortress monasteries besieged and archives destroyed, it's possible that this Dreadnought's location was simply lost to time. The warrior within was meant to be awakened, meant to serve again, but the knowledge of where it was stored, how to retrieve it, or even that it existed at all, was erased from the chapter's records. 777 years of silence, of absence, of non-existence. The galaxy turned without this warrior's presence. Battles were fought without their expertise. Generations of space marines lived and died never knowing this ancient hero existed. And all the while, sealed in darkness, preserved in stasis, the consciousness waited. Not actively, not with awareness, but simply existing. Potential energy waiting to become kinetic. A weapon waiting to be fired. A warrior waiting for the call to battle that should have come centuries ago. Now that call is about to come, not from loyal tech marines performing the awakening rituals, not from a chapter master requesting the Ancients' counsel on matters of strategic import, not from the carefully controlled process that should govern the return of a Dreadnought to consciousness. No, this awakening will be violent, chaotic, and entirely unexpected, because the Orks have broken through the last layer of rubble, have spotted the massive armored form buried in the debris, and are now very, very interested in what they've found. They're shouting to each other, arguing about who gets to claim the shiny bits, already imagining how they might repurpose this impressive piece of humi-tech for their own purposes. They have no idea that inside that armored shell is not just machinery, but a consciousness, a warrior, a mind that has been shaped by centuries of battle, hardened by the trials of Dreadnought, existence, and is about to experience the most disorienting awakening imaginable. The stasis systems are beginning to fail, not through any planned deactivation sequence, but through damage caused by Ork excavation equipment tearing through power cables and coolant lines. Emergency systems are activating. Life support is coming online. The amniotic fluid is changing composition. Neural interfaces are reconnecting. And within the sarcophagus, after 777 years of absolute silence, a consciousness is beginning to stir. The Ork menace. Understanding the greenskins. To fully grasp what's about to unfold, we need to understand the creatures who have made this discovery. The Orks are perhaps the most ubiquitous threat in the entire galaxy. They're found on countless worlds, in every sector, in regions controlled by every major faction. They've been fighting since before humanity spread to the stars, and they'll likely still be fighting long after humanity is gone. Orks are not native to any particular world. They're a created species, artificially engineered millions of years ago by an ancient race known as the Old Ones, during a terrible conflict called the War in Heaven. The Old Ones, facing extinction at the hands of the Necrons and the star gods called the Catan, created several servitor races designed to be the ultimate soldiers. The Eldar were designed to be warriors of grace and psychic power. The Orks were designed to be something altogether different, the perfect survivors. The original version of the Orks, sometimes called the Krork, were larger, stronger, and more intelligent than their modern descendants. But when the Old Ones fell and their control over these created races was lost, the Orks devolved into their current form. They're smaller now, less sophisticated in some ways, but they've retained all the characteristics that made them such effective weapons. Incredible toughness, aggressive temperament, and most importantly, the ability to reproduce and thrive in almost any environment. Ork biology is fundamentally different from human biology. They're not truly animals at all, but rather a symbiotic organism that combines features of both plant and fungus. An orc's green skin isn't just pigmentation. It contains chlorophyll analog compounds that allow them to derive some nutrition from sunlight. When an orc dies, or even when they shed skin cells or lose blood, they release spores into the environment. These spores grow into fungal colonies that eventually produce new orcs, along with smaller related species like Gretchen and squigs. This means that orcs are incredibly difficult to eliminate completely. You can kill every orc on a battlefield, you can burn their bodies, you can sterilize the ground with plasma and flame. But if even a few spores survive, if even a microscopic amount of orc biological material remains, the infestation will return. Within weeks or months, new orcs will emerge, drawn together by instincts encoded in their very genes. And once even a small population is established, it will grow exponentially. Orc physiology makes them remarkably resilient. Their bodies are incredibly tough, able to survive injuries that would kill most other species. They have a redundant respiratory system, meaning they can continue breathing even if parts of their lungs are destroyed. Their bones are incredibly dense. Their musculature is layered in a way that provides both strength and shock absorption. They can regrow lost limbs given time. They can survive in environments that would kill humans, from toxic wastelands to near vacuum conditions. But it's not just their physical bodies that make orcs dangerous. It's their psychology, their culture, their entire approach to existence. Orcs have a genetic memory of sorts, encoded in what Imperial scholars call the techno gene. As an orc matures, this gene releases information directly into their brain. Every orc instinctively knows how to speak the orc language, how to fight, how to operate basic weapons, and how to recognize who's in charge through simple visual assessment of size and presence. This is where orc society becomes fascinating in its brutal simplicity. Orcs have no concept of democracy, no complex political systems, no philosophical debates about governance. Their entire social structure is based on one principle: might makes right. The biggest, strongest, most successful orc in any given group is automatically in charge. If you want to lead, you need to be bigger and meaner than everyone else. If you want to keep leading, you need to stay bigger and meaner than everyone who might challenge you. This creates a society that is in constant flux, with orcs fighting each other almost as much as they fight external enemies. But paradoxically, this internal competition makes them stronger. Orcs who survive combat grow larger and tougher. The constant fighting creates a natural selection pressure that ensures only the most capable warriors rise to leadership positions. By the time an orc becomes a war boss, leading hundreds or thousands of other orcs, he's survived countless battles and proven his worth through sheer martial prowess. Orcs live for combat in a way that most other species find difficult to comprehend. They don't fight because they have to, or because they're defending territory, or because they have some political or economic goal. They fight because fighting is what they were created to do, and more importantly, because they genuinely enjoy it. An orc in battle is an orc in his natural element, experiencing something close to joy. The noise, the violence, the chaos, the risk of death, all of it combines into an experience that orcs find deeply satisfying. This isn't just cultural preference, it's biological necessity. Orcs need violence the way humans need food and water. Extended periods without combat make orcs irritable, restless, prone to infighting. When orc populations reach a certain critical mass, when enough of them are gathered in one place, something remarkable happens. A massive psychic field, generated by the collective consciousness of thousands or millions of orcs, begins to coalesce. This field, called a battle surge by Imperial scholars, drives the orcs into an even more frenzied state. They begin to move as one, to act with unusual coordination, to push forward in a massive tide of green-skinned violence that crashes across worlds and sweeps away everything in its path. This psychic field has other effects as well. It's partly responsible for the strange phenomenon that makes Ork technology work, despite all logic suggesting it shouldn't. Ork weapons are, by any reasonable engineering standard, complete garbage. They're cobbled together from scrap metal, held together with rivets and welds, missing critical components, assembled without regard for proper tolerances or safety considerations. A human trying to fire an Ork gun would find it either doesn't work at all, or explodes in their hands, or falls apart after a few shots. But when an Ork uses that same weapon, it functions. The trigger pulls, the firing mechanism engages, the bullet or energy blast emerges from the barrel and strikes the target. This isn't just the Orks being lucky, it's the psychic field doing its work. The collective belief of the Orks that a weapon will function actually helps make it function. The Gestalt psychic energy fills in the gaps left by poor engineering, holds together components that should fly apart, and generally ensures that Ork technology works well enough to be dangerous, despite being theoretically impossible. This same principle applies to other Ork beliefs. They believe that red vehicles go faster, so red vehicles piloted by Orks actually do move with increased speed. They believe that bigger guns shoot further and harder, so Ork big shooters genuinely pack more punch than their construction suggests they should. They believe that certain Orks are luckier than others, and those Orks actually do seem to experience improbable good fortune in combat. But there are limits to this psychic influence. It's not omnipotent. An Ork can't just believe that a stick will work as a plasma gun and have it function. The technology needs to be at least conceptually close to what it's supposed to do. A shooter needs to have something resembling a barrel, a trigger, and an ammunition source. The psychic field gives it that extra push to function, but there needs to be some foundation for that push to work with. This is where mech boys come into the picture. Mech boys are Orks with an especially pronounced techno gene. While all Orks have some instinctive understanding of technology, mech boys have vast reserves of engineering knowledge encoded in their DNA. They instinctively understand mechanical principles, can visualize how components fit together, can diagnose problems with machinery just by listening to it run. A mech boy can look at a pile of scrap and see a vehicle. He can examine a broken Imperial weapon and understand how to fix it or repurpose it for Ork use. Mech boys are critical to any Ork warband. Without them, vehicles wouldn't run, weapons wouldn't fire, and the whole ramshackle structure of Ork warfare would collapse. They maintain, repair, and improve everything the Orks use. They're constantly tinkering, always trying to make things bigger, louder, more destructive. They work not from blueprints or established procedures, but from instinct and intuition, hammering and welding and bashing components together until something works. And when they find something interesting, something advanced, something that clearly required skill and knowledge to create, mech boys become absolutely fascinated. They see such items as puzzles to be solved, treasures to be acquired, components to be integrated into their own creations. The more complex and sophisticated the technology, the more excited they become. Which brings us back to the Dreadnought. The Orks who have just exposed this ancient war machine to the light are shouting for their mech boys. They recognize that this is something special, something valuable. The armor alone, that thick ceramite plating, is worth its weight in teeth. The weapons mounted on it, even if they're damaged or depleted, represent technology far beyond what most Orks can create. And the sophisticated systems that allow it to function, the power source, the actuators, the targeting arrays, all of it is exactly the kind of advanced Imperial tech that mech boys dream about getting their hands on. The mech boys are coming now, pushing through the crowd of boys who are arguing about who found it first. The lead, mech, a burly specimen with an impressive collection of tools and mechanical limbs, is already examining the Dreadnought with a practiced eye. He's circling it, tapping on armor plates, listening to the sound they make. He's checking access panels, looking for weak points, trying to figure out how to get inside to see what makes this thing tick. He's so focused on the technological prize in front of him that he doesn't notice the subtle changes beginning to occur within the Dreadnought itself. The emergency reactivation sequence is building toward critical threshold. System after system is coming online. Neural pathways are reconnecting. The amniotic fluid is warming to operational temperature. And within the sarcophagus, a consciousness that has been absent for 777 years is about to return. The Orks have found what they were looking for. Valuable salvage, advanced technology, something they can loot and repurpose for their endless war. What they haven't realized yet is that this particular piece of salvage is very much alive, and it's about to wake up very, very angry. The stage is set. The actors are in position. All that remains is for the curtain to rise on a confrontation that will be violent, chaotic, and absolutely unforgettable. Ancient warrior and savage scavenger are about to meet, and the galaxy itself seems to hold its breath in anticipation of what comes next. Ork technology and the mech boys understanding the impossible. The mech boy currently examining the buried Dreadnought is named Grokfist, though his full title among his warband is Grokfist the Shiny Finder, most flashest mech of the Bloodfang mob. He's earned this title through decades of successful looting and an impressive talent for creating weapons that don't explode immediately when fired. His mechanical arms, replacements for limbs lost in various workshop accidents, click and whir as he runs his oversized hands across the Dreadnought's armor. To understand why this moment is so significant, we need to delve deeper into how Orks interact with technology, particularly Imperial technology. The relationship is complex, counterintuitive, and frankly somewhat disturbing to those who prefer their universe to operate according to rational principles. Grokfist doesn't see the Dreadnought the way a human tech marine would. He doesn't understand it in terms of sacred machine spirits or holy patterns handed down from the blessed standard template constructs. He doesn't analyze it through the lens of proper maintenance rituals or prescribed operational procedures. Instead, he looks at it and sees possibilities. He sees plates that could be removed and welded onto a truck. He sees weapons that could be mounted on a Def Dread. He sees power systems that could be redirected to run a dozen different devices. He sees a puzzle box full of interesting components, and his fingers are already itching to start taking it apart. The question that haunts Imperial scholars is this: how is it possible for Orks to make such sophisticated use of technology they don't truly understand? A mech boy can take a las rifle, examine it for a few minutes, then integrate it into an Ork weapon system. He doesn't understand the principles of focused light amplification. He doesn't know the manufacturing processes that created the focusing crystal. He couldn't explain the energy storage systems or the thermal management required for sustained fire, and yet he can make it work. More than that, he can often make it work better than it did originally, at least by Ork standards of better, which usually means louder and more destructive. The answer lies in that techno gene, that genetic inheritance from the old ones who created the original Krork. But the gene doesn't contain complete technical manuals or detailed schematics. It's more like an instinctive understanding of how things work, a gut-level sense of what parts do what and how they might be connected. A mech boy looks at a damaged Imperial machine and just knows. In the same way, a bird knows how to build a nest, or a spider knows how to spin a web. The knowledge is encoded directly into his nervous system. But there's a second component to Ork technology that makes it truly inexplicable to outsiders: the Gestalt psychic field. This field, generated by the collective unconscious of all nearby Orks, literally bends reality. Not dramatically, not in the flashy, obvious way that chaos sorcery warps the universe. The changes are subtle, probabilistic, operating at the quantum level, but they're real. When an Ork pulls the trigger on a shooter that, by all rights, shouldn't fire because the firing pin is missing, or the barrel is cracked, or the ammunition is the wrong caliber. The psychic field nudges reality. It increases the probability that the weapon will function anyway. Maybe the firing pin isn't quite as missing as it appeared. Maybe the crack in the barrel is aligned in such a way that it doesn't compromise structural integrity. Maybe the ammunition, despite being the wrong size, still manages to chamber and fire. The field doesn't create these solutions from nothing, but it tips the scales, making the improbable become probable and the barely possible become actual. This is why orc weapons often don't work in human hands. Without the psychic field generated by nearby orcs to smooth over the rough edges of their engineering, without that reality-bending influence making the impossible possible, an orc shooter is exactly what it looks like. A barely functional assemblage of scrap metal that should fly apart after the first trigger pull. The more orcs are present, the stronger this field becomes. A lone orc might struggle to make his weapons work reliably. A mob of orcs creates a stronger field that makes their technology more effective. A full crusade numbering millions of greenskins generates a psychic tide so powerful that it can enable genuinely impossible engineering feats. This is what makes mech boys so valuable. They don't just understand technology, they serve as focal points for the psychic field's reality-bending effects. A mech boy working on a vehicle doesn't just repair it in the conventional sense, he channels the collective belief of nearby orcs that the vehicle should work, will work, must work, because the mech is fixing it. The psychic energy flows through his hands as he welds and hammers, reinforcing his belief in his own competence, which in turn makes the repairs more effective. When mech boys encounter advanced technology like that found in the Dreadnought, several factors come into play. First, they recognize that this is high-quality equipment, the kind of gear that proves the humies might be weak, but they certainly know how to build proper war machines. Second, they understand that components from such advanced systems can be integrated into orc technology, improving performance. Third, and perhaps most importantly, they know that successfully looting and repurposing such technology earns them respect and status among other orcs. Grokfist is currently trying to figure out how to open the Dreadnought's armor plating. He's examined several access panels, but hasn't found the right sequence of release mechanisms. This doesn't frustrate him. On the contrary, he's enjoying the challenge. Every locked panel is a puzzle. Every sealed system is a test of his skills. He's already imagining the components he'll find inside, already planning how he'll use them. He's brought some of his favorite tools, a massive power wrench that could unscrew a tank's hull plating, a cutting torch that burns hot enough to slice through ceramite, and a selection of pry bars ranging from merely large to absolutely ridiculous. He's also brought several Gretchen assistants, smaller greenskin creatures who serve as general-purpose laborers and cannon fodder in orc society. The Gretchen are already gathering around the Dreadnought, their beady eyes gleaming with opportunistic greed as they imagine what trinkets and scrap they might be able to steal while the mech is distracted. The other orcs in the warband are watching with interest. Some of them recognize that this is a significant find and want to be nearby when it's opened, hoping to claim some of the loot for themselves. Others are simply curious about what Humi technology looks like on the inside. A few of the larger knobs are already arguing about who gets to claim the biggest weapons if they can be removed intact. None of them have noticed the subtle vibration beginning to emanate from within the Dreadnought. None of them have registered that some of the status lights on its armor, dormant for centuries, have begun to flicker back to life. None of them understand that emergency activation protocols are running their course, that system diagnostics are being performed, that a consciousness trapped in darkness is beginning to sense light. Grokfist has finally found what he thinks is the main access panel. He's examining the locking mechanism, trying to figure out how it opens. He doesn't realize that this particular panel is designed to be opened only from the inside, as an emergency escape route for the tech marine, performing maintenance. He doesn't know that attempting to force it will trigger additional security protocols. He raises his power wrench, preparing to simply bash the panel until something gives way. This is, after all, a time-tested Ork engineering technique. When in doubt, hit it until it works or breaks into components that you can hit more effectively. He brings the wrench down with considerable force. The impact reverberates through the Dreadnought's frame, triggering sensors that haven't been active in 7 centuries. Emergency systems interpret this as an attack. Defense protocols engage. And somewhere deep within the machinery, the final locks on the stasis systems are forcibly released. The reactivation sequence, which should have taken hours under normal conditions, compressed into minutes by the emergency override, reaches completion. Within the sarcophagus, the warrior wakes. The discovery scenario, uncovering the ancient. Let's rewind slightly and examine exactly how this situation came to be. The Orks didn't find this dreadnought by chance, at least not entirely. There's a story behind every discovery, and understanding it helps us grasp the full significance of what's about to unfold. The world is called Markos Prime, though it had a different name 777 years ago when the dreadnought was last conscious. It's a death world, a planet classified by the Imperium as barely habitable, its environment actively hostile to human life. The original colonists who settled here during the Great Crusade were a hardy breed, and their descendants proved even tougher through generations of natural selection and adaptation. 777 years ago, Markos Prime was the site of a significant battle. A greenskin invasion force, large enough to threaten the entire sector, had established a forward base on the planet. The Imperium responded with overwhelming force, deploying 3 full companies of Space Marines along, with supporting Imperial Guard regiments and Mechanicus tech support. The battle raged for months. The Orks had entrenched themselves deeply, building a sprawling complex of fortifications that covered several square kilometers. The Space Marines, from a chapter whose name has since been lost to Imperial records due to a bureaucratic error or perhaps a more sinister form of deletion, fought with characteristic determination. Among them was a venerable Dreadnought, a warrior who had already served for over 2 centuries before this battle. His name long since replaced by the designation Ancient Macarius. Ancient Macarius fought on the front lines throughout the campaign. His assault cannon carved through Ork mobs. His power fist crushed war buggies and smashed through fortifications. His tactical wisdom, drawn from 2 centuries of combat experience, provided crucial insights that helped break the greenskin defenses. He was, by all accounts, instrumental in the eventual Imperial victory. But victory came at a cost. In the final assault on the Ork central stronghold, Ancient Macarius advanced too far ahead of supporting units. He was swarmed by Orks, their crude but effective weapons tearing into his armor. A massive Ork warboss, wielding a power claw looted from previous battles, managed to breach the Dreadnought's armor plating. The damage was extensive. Critical systems were compromised. The warrior within was in danger of permanent death. The battle was won, but Ancient Macarius was severely damaged. The chapter's tech marines performed emergency repairs, enough to stabilize the life support systems and prevent further deterioration. But the damage was too extensive for field repairs. The Ancient would need to return to the chapter's fortress monastery for comprehensive restoration. Except that didn't happen. The details are murky, lost to time and incomplete records. But what seems to have occurred is this. Ancient Macarius was placed in long-term stasis, sealed within a temporary shelter, while waiting for transport off-world. But before that transport could arrive, the sector was hit by massive warp storms. Communication was disrupted. Fleet movements became impossible. The temporary shelter, built to last weeks, ended up needing to last centuries. By the time the warp storms cleared and normal Imperial operations could resume, the chapter had moved on. They assumed Ancient Macarius had been recovered and returned to the fortress monastery. The records of his location on Markos Prime were lost in the chaos of the storms. The temporary shelter, buried under years of accumulated debris and geological shifting, simply disappeared from official records. Ancient Markarius remained there, in stasis, as decades became centuries. The world above him changed. The battlefield was gradually reclaimed by Marcos Prime's aggressive native ecology. The temporary shelter was buried deeper with each passing year. Eventually, even the knowledge that a battle had been fought here was forgotten by the local population, who had their own struggles to contend with. But the galaxy, as it so often does, came full circle. Marcos Prime, which had been stripped of its strategic value after the Ork threat was eliminated, suddenly became important again. A different Ork force, unrelated to the one defeated centuries ago, had established a presence in the sector. They needed resources, raw materials for their endless war machine. Marcos Prime, with its rich mineral deposits, was exactly what they needed. The Orks descended on the world in force. They immediately began strip mining operations, tearing into the planet's crust with the kind of enthusiastic destruction that only greenskins can muster. Their excavations cut deep into the ground, exposing layers of geological history, and eventually, inevitably, they cut into something artificial. Grokfist the Shiny Finder was supervising one of these excavation sites when his Gretchen workers reported finding something metal buried in the dig. Grokfist, always alert for valuable salvage, immediately went to investigate. What he found made his eyes light up with greedy enthusiasm. The temporary shelter had partially collapsed under the weight of centuries, but it had done its job. The Dreadnought inside was still intact, still sealed, still protected. The stasis systems, designed to function for extended periods with minimal power, had continued operating long past their intended duration. Grokfist called for more workers, more equipment, more everything. This was a significant find, the kind that could earn him considerable status among the warband. He organized the excavation with surprising efficiency, directing his Gretchen to carefully remove debris while Ork boys provided muscle for the heavier lifting. It took 3 days to fully expose the Dreadnought. During that time, word spread through the Ork encampment. More and more greenskins came to watch the excavation to see what the mech had found. By the time the last of the rubble was cleared away, Grokfist had an audience of nearly 100 Orks, all of them eager to see what would happen next. The Dreadnought stood before them, coated in centuries of dust and grime, but still fundamentally intact. The armor showed damage from the battle that had preceded its burial, but it was remarkably well preserved. The weapons, though powered down and likely depleted, were still mounted in place. Various systems and components were visible through damaged sections of the chassis. To Grokfist and his fellow Orks, this was a treasure trove. To the warband's war boss, who had come to observe once he heard about the find, this was proof that Marcos Prime held more than just mineral wealth. If one piece of Humi tech was buried here, there might be more. To ancient Markarius, who still hadn't stirred from his 777-year slumber, this moment represented something entirely different. It was the end of a sleep that had lasted far too long, and the beginning of an awakening that would be unlike anything in his long, tragic existence as a Dreadnought. The scene was set. Ancient war machine surrounded by savage Xenos scavengers. Advanced Imperial technology about to be subjected to crude Ork engineering attempts. A consciousness preserved for nearly 8 centuries, about to return to a galaxy that had changed in ways both subtle and profound. All that remained was for that consciousness to wake and for the consequences to unfold. Initial contact. Xenos at the gates. Grokfist's power wrench crashes into the access panel with a sound like a church bell being struck by a meteor. The impact reverberates through the Dreadnought's entire frame, transmitted through armored hull plates and structural support beams, carried along neural interface conduits and sensory relay systems. To a machine that has been silent for centuries, this sudden violence is the equivalent of being shocked awake by a bucket of ice water. Deep within the sarcophagus, systems that have been dormant for 777 years suddenly activate in rapid succession. Emergency protocols, designed to respond to external attacks, while the primary operator is in stasis, engage with mechanical precision. Diagnostics run. Threat assessment algorithms begin analyzing available data. Power flows from backup reserves to critical systems. The first thing ancient Markarius becomes aware of is pain. Not physical pain exactly, since the nerve endings that would transmit such sensations were destroyed centuries ago. But there's a phantom echo of it, a memory of what pain used to feel like, triggered by the violent reawakening of systems that were meant to be brought online gradually and carefully. The second thing he becomes aware of is confusion. This isn't the controlled awakening he expected. There are no tech marines performing the sacred rituals. No chaplains offering prayers and benedictions. No familiar voices of battle brothers welcoming him back to consciousness. Instead, there's violence, chaos, and the unpleasant sensation of something trying to forcibly break into his armored shell. The third thing he becomes aware of, as his sensory systems finish their startup sequence and begin feeding information to his consciousness, is what's surrounding him. And that's when confusion gives way to something more primal: rage. His optical senses, after 7 centuries of seeing nothing but darkness, flare to life. Multiple camera feeds and targeting arrays suddenly provide him with a full 360-degree view of his surroundings. What he sees would be shocking under any circumstances. After centuries of sleep, it's almost incomprehensible. Orks, dozens of them, green-skinned, brutish, savage, the ancient enemy. The Xenos scum that the Imperium has fought since the Great Crusade. They're everywhere, surrounding him, examining him, touching him with their filthy hands. One of them, larger than the others and festooned with mechanical augmentations, is actively trying to breach his armor with a massive wrench. The confusion evaporates instantly. Ancient Markarius doesn't need to understand how he got here, or why he was in stasis for so long, or what has changed in the galaxy since he last drew breath. None of that matters in this moment. What matters is that he is surrounded by the enemy, that Xenos creatures are attempting to violate the sanctity of his armored shell, and that this is an intolerable situation that must be addressed immediately. His weapon systems are still powering up. The assault cannon needs precious seconds to cycle to full operational readiness. The power fist requires its generator to reach optimal charge levels. But Dreadnoughts are equipped with more than just their primary weapons. They have secondary systems, backup options, contingencies for exactly this sort of situation. The first thing the Orks notice is sound. A deep mechanical growl emanates from within the Dreadnought, a noise that speaks of ancient machinery coming to life, of power systems activating, of something that has been sleeping beginning to wake. It's a sound that carries menace in every vibration, a warning that should have sent every Ork running for cover. But Orks don't run from interesting noises. They move toward them. Grokfist pulls his wrench back for another strike, while other Orks crowd closer, curious about what's happening. The Gretchen, sensing danger with the instinctive cowardice of their kind, start to back away. But the Orks themselves, fearless or perhaps simply too dim to recognize the threat, remain in place. The second thing they notice is movement. The Dreadnought, which has been motionless for so long that some of the Orks had started to wonder if it was just an elaborate statue, begins to shift. Small movements at first, almost imperceptible. Adjustments of stance as servos and actuators resume function. Then, larger movements. The head unit rotates, optical sensors tracking across the assembled Orks with the precision of targeting arrays marking priority threats. To ancient Markarius, viewing the world through his optical feeds, the situation is simultaneously familiar and alien. He's fought Orks countless times during his centuries of service. He knows their capabilities, their tactics, their weaknesses. But he's never been in a situation quite like this. Surrounded while still in the process of reactivating, unable to immediately respond with the overwhelming firepower that is normally a Dreadnought's first response to any threat. His consciousness is still catching up with his situation. The awakening process normally involves a gradual return to awareness, carefully managed by tech marines who monitor vitals and ensure mental stability. This violent, chaotic return to consciousness is disorienting. His last clear memory is of preparing for stasis after the battle on. The name of the world escapes him for a moment. The details are fuzzy, distant, like trying to recall a dream after waking. But the Orks before him are not distant or fuzzy. They're immediate, real, threatening. And that crystallizes his thinking in a way that no amount of careful awakening procedures could match. He has a clear objective: survive. A clear threat: hostile Xenos. A clear response: exterminate them with extreme prejudice. Grokfist, oblivious to the danger he's in, raises his wrench for another blow. He's shouting something to the other Orks, probably claiming credit for making the machine work. Several of the larger Orks are arguing about who gets to claim parts of it once Grokfist opens it up. The Gretchen, now convinced something bad is about to happen, have fled entirely. They're the smart ones. Ancient Markarias' assault cannon finishes its activation sequence. Ammunition feeds connect. Targeting systems lock on. The ancient war machine, after 777 years of enforced silence, is about to remind the galaxy why dreadnoughts are so feared. The barrel of the assault cannon begins to rotate. It's a sound unmistakable to anyone who's ever been in combat. That particular high-pitched whine of a multi-barrel weapon spinning up to firing speed. Several of the Orks recognize it, veterans who fought the Imperium before and lived to remember the sound. They start to shout warnings. They start to back away. They start to realize that this piece of salvage they've uncovered isn't dormant machinery waiting to be looted. It's a predator that was sleeping, and they've just woken it up. Grokfist, still in the middle of his attempt to breach the armor, finally looks up at the weapon pointed directly at him. His mechanical eye focuses on the spinning barrel. His enhanced vision tracks the ammunition feed engaging. His considerable experience with firearms, both Ork and looted Imperial varieties, provides him with an immediate and accurate assessment of his situation. He's standing directly in front of a fully charged assault cannon at point-blank range. The last thought that goes through Grokfist's mind before the weapon fires is actually somewhat philosophical for an Ork. He thinks, "This gonna hurt." He's right. The awakening, fury after silence. The assault cannon speaks with a voice like thunder compressed into 3-second bursts. Each barrel fires in sequence, creating a continuous stream of mass-reactive rounds that tear through anything in their path. The sound is apocalyptic, overwhelming every other noise on the battlefield, a mechanical scream of fury that announces the return of an ancient warrior to the galaxy's endless wars. Grokfist, Darshini Finder, ceases to exist as a coherent entity approximately 0.3 seconds after the weapon fires. The first shell strikes him center mass, the explosive charge detonating inside his torso and converting organic matter into a red mist. The next 17 shells pass through the space where he was standing, each one finding a new target among the Orks crowded behind him. From ancient Markarias' perspective, the world has suddenly simplified into something blessedly straightforward. There are enemies. He has weapons. The rest is simply a matter of execution. His targeting systems, running on software that predates most of the Imperium's current military institutions, identify threats with mechanical precision. Priority targets light up in his vision. Firing solutions calculate instantly. His consciousness, freed from the horrible uncertainty of awakening, settles into the familiar rhythms of combat. The Orks are scattering now, their initial shock giving way to their natural response to violence. More violence. Several of them are raising weapons, crude shooters and sluggers that nonetheless pack considerable stopping power at close range. A few of the larger ones, knobs by their size and the quality of their equipment, are charging forward rather than fleeing, driven by Orkish ferocity and the dim awareness that running from a fight is un-Orky behavior. Ancient Markarias tracks them all. His assault cannon sweeps in a wide arc, shells finding targets with every rotation of the barrel cluster. Orks fall, their tough physiology no match for mass-reactive rounds designed to kill superhuman warriors in power armor. The rounds punch through green skin and crude armor, detonate inside bodies, send fragments of metal and bone scattering in lethal sprays. But even as his assault cannon does its devastating work, ancient Macarius is aware that something is wrong with his situation. His power fist, which should have been at full charge by now, is showing error messages in his status displays. The neural linkage that should let him feel the fist as if it were his own hand is crackling with interference. When he tries to move it, the massive mechanical arm responds sluggishly, jerking rather than flowing through the motion. This is concerning, but not immediately critical. His assault cannon is functioning perfectly, and that's more than sufficient for the current threat level. The Orks are dying by the dozen, their mob disrupted by the sheer violence of his retaliation. Those who aren't dead or fleeing are seeking cover, and there isn't much cover to be found in the excavation site. Through the mechanical clarity of combat, ancient Macarius becomes aware of details about his situation. He's partially buried in rubble. His lower chassis is still partially entombed in whatever structure the Orks were excavating. The ground beneath him feels unstable, centuries of geological shifting having altered the terrain. His internal gyroscopic stabilizers are compensating, but he's not in an optimal firing position. More concerning are the damage indicators lighting up across his internal displays. Red warning symbols indicate compromised systems, degraded armor, integrity, failed redundancies. He knew he had been damaged in that last battle, whatever battle it was, but the extent of the damage is only now becoming clear as systems attempt to activate and discover they cannot. His assault cannon runs dry. The ammunition feed, which should hold thousands of rounds, depletes after just a few hundred. This is bad. This suggests that either his magazines weren't fully loaded when he went into stasis, or that time has degraded the stored ammunition, or that the feeding mechanism is damaged and failing to deliver rounds properly. The Orks, sensing the cessation of fire, begin to rally. It's one of the peculiar characteristics of greenskins that they refuse to stay demoralized. Where other species might break and flee after suffering such devastating casualties, Orks recover quickly, their natural aggression overwhelming any sense of self-preservation. A massive Ork warboss, distinguished by his size and the impressive collection of crude bionics and oversized weapons he carries, emerges from behind the wreckage of an excavation vehicle. He's bellowing something in the guttural Ork tongue, probably calling his boys to rally to him. Other Orks begin to respond, moving out of cover, raising weapons, preparing for another charge. Ancient Macarius assesses the situation with the cold logic of centuries of combat experience. He's currently partially immobile, low on ammunition, with multiple systems compromised. He's facing a force of unknown size, composition, and capability. By any rational calculation, this is a tactically disadvantageous position. But he's a space marine. More than that, he's a veteran of countless battles, a warrior who has served for centuries, a dreadnought who has faced worse odds and prevailed. And more fundamentally, he's currently very, very angry about being awakened after 777 years, only to find himself surrounded by Xeno's filth. Tactical disadvantage be damned. He's going to make these greenskins regret every decision that led them to this moment. His power fist, despite its malfunctions, still retains some functionality. The energy field generators are charging, albeit slowly and with considerable electrical discharge that shouldn't be happening. The servos are responding to his neural commands, even if that response is delayed and imprecise. It's not ideal, but it will have to do. He begins to move, pulling himself free from the rubble that partially entombs him. Hydraulics groan with the effort. Centuries of disuse have left their mark on his systems, and he can feel the strain in every actuator, every joint, every connection between his consciousness and the machine that has become his body. The war boss is still rallying his troops, still building up to a charge. He's massive even by Ork standards, probably approaching 3 meters in height. his arms enhanced with crude bionics that end in massive power claws. Behind him, dozens of orcs are forming, up, their natural instinct for violence overcoming their recent shock. Ancient Macarius pulls himself completely free from the rubble with a final grinding effort. He stands at his full height for the first time in 777 years, a towering figure of ceramite and adamantium, battered but unbroken, ancient but still deadly. The war boss sees him stand, sees the massive war machine rise from the ruins, sees the weapon arms orient toward him, and in that moment, the war boss makes a decision that seals his fate. Instead of ordering his boys to scatter and regroup, instead of calling for heavy weapons or vehicles, he does the most orky thing possible. He charges. The other orcs, taking their cue from their leader, charge with him. Dozens of green-skinned warriors surge forward in a ragged wave, their weapons firing, their voices raised in a collective roar that combines fury and joy in equal measure. Ancient Macarius watches them come with something approaching, satisfaction. This, at least, is familiar. This is warfare as he knows it. Enemies charging toward him, weapons at the ready, confident in their numbers and strength. He's faced countless such charges over his centuries of service. He knows exactly how to respond. His assault cannon is empty, but he has other weapons. His secondary systems include a stormbolter mounted on his chassis, less devastating than the assault cannon, but still deadly against infantry. He opens fire, the distinctive boom-boom-boom of bolter rounds joining the chaos of combat. Explosive rounds find targets, detonating against orc bodies, sending shrapnel through green flesh. But more orcs are coming than his stormbolter can handle. They're too close now for ranged weapons to stop them all, which is fine. His power fist, malfunctioning though it may be, is still a power fist, and there's nothing quite like crushing Xenos at close range. The first orc to reach him is a large boy wielding a massive chopper, the Dasante, blade already dripping with blood from whatever previous victim it claimed. The orc swings the weapon with considerable force, aiming for the joints in Ancient Macarius's leg armor, trying to cripple the Dreadnought before it can respond. Ancient Macarius responds by bringing his power fist down in a massive overhand strike that catches the orc mid-swing. The energy field surrounding the fist crackles with discharge as it impacts, the crude melee weapon shattering on contact. The orc himself is driven into the ground with such force that he practically becomes part of the terrain, his body pulped by the impact. More orcs reach melee range. They're swarming around him now, attacking from multiple angles, their weapons sparking against his armor. Most of the impacts are ineffective, glancing off ceramite plates that have endured far worse punishment. But some find vulnerable spots, weak points in his already damaged armor, places where the protection is compromised. Ancient Macarius fights with the mechanical precision that comes from centuries of experience. His power fist sweeps through orcs in wide arcs. His chassis rotates to present armored sections toward the heaviest attacks. His remaining ranged weapons fire at point-blank range, every shot finding a target. The war boss has finally reached him, his massive form bursting through the mob of smaller orcs. He's wielding a pair of power claws, looted Imperial technology repurposed for orc use, their energy fields crackling as he brings them to bear. He swings at Ancient Macarius's weapon arm, trying to disable the Stormbolter, trying to remove the Dreadnought's ranged capability. Ancient Macarius blocks the strike with his power fist, metal and energy fields colliding in a shower of sparks. The force of the impact reverberates through his chassis. The war boss is strong, enhanced by his size and bionics to a degree that makes him dangerous even to a Dreadnought. But strength isn't everything. Ancient Macarius has 777 years of experience that this war boss doesn't. He's fought enemies more dangerous than this. He's survived battles that should have killed him. He's mastered the art of combat in a Dreadnought chassis, learned to use its strengths and compensate for its weaknesses. He feints with his Stormbolter, drawing the war boss's attention. When the Xenos moves to block, ancient Markarius brings his power fist around in a backhanded strike that catches the warboss in the torso. The energy field disrupts the crude armor. The physical force of the blow drives metal fragments deep into green flesh. The warboss staggers, but doesn't fall. Orks are notoriously difficult to kill. Their redundant organs and incredible resilience, letting them survive injuries that would kill most other species. He strikes back, both claws driving forward, trying to breach ancient Markarius's armor through sheer force. One claw glances off the chest plating. The other finds a gap, a weak point where the armor has already been compromised. It digs in, the energy field disrupting metal, the physical blades tearing through layers of protection. Warning alerts flash across ancient Markarius's displays. Internal damage, systems compromised, power coupling severed. The Stormbolter goes offline. The Power Fist's energy field flickers and threatens to fail. Ancient Markarius finds himself in genuine danger for the first time since awakening. The warboss is pressing his advantage, his claws tearing at the compromised armor, trying to reach the vital systems beneath. But ancient Markarius isn't done yet, not by a long measure. He still has one weapon that every Dreadnought possesses, one option that requires no power beyond his own will and the basic hydraulics of his chassis. He uses his mass. A Dreadnought weighs several tons. When that much mass is put in motion, it becomes an unstoppable force. Ancient Markarius drives forward, his damaged legs protesting but still functional, his entire chassis serving as a battering ram. He crashes into the warboss with the force of a charging tank. The warboss, for all his size and strength, simply cannot resist that much kinetic energy. He's driven backward, his claws losing their grip on ancient Markarius's armor. He stumbles, his balance lost. And in that moment of vulnerability, ancient Markarius strikes. His power fist, energy field fluctuating wildly but still active, comes down in a devastating overhead blow that catches the warboss in the head. The Ork's skull, reinforced though it may be, is no match for ceramite and crackling energy. The impact is final. The warboss falls, his massive body crashing to the ground and moving no more. The remaining Orks, seeing their leader killed, begin to waver. Orks can endure tremendous casualties without breaking, but the loss of a warboss creates a momentary power vacuum. The mob's cohesion begins to dissolve as individual Orks start to think about self-preservation rather than collective victory. Ancient Markarius doesn't give them time to recover. He advances through them, his remaining weapons firing, his power fist rising and falling in mechanical precision. He's damaged, low on ammunition, his systems failing one by one. But he's still a Dreadnought, still a Space Marine, still a warrior who has served the Emperor for centuries. The Orks break, not in a coordinated retreat, but in a chaotic scatter, each greenskin fleeing in whatever direction seems most likely to preserve their life. Some run for vehicles, others simply flee on foot. A few of the particularly stubborn ones continue to fight, their natural aggression overcoming survival instinct, but they die quickly under ancient Markarius's remaining firepower. Within minutes of his awakening, the excavation site is littered with Ork corpses. Green blood stains the ground. Crude weapons lie scattered among the bodies. The only sounds are the groaning of ancient Markarius's damaged systems and the distant rumble of fleeing Ork vehicles. He stands among the carnage, his optical sensors scanning for remaining threats. His damaged systems send increasingly urgent warnings. Power levels are dropping. Life support is fluctuating. The sarcophagus that maintains his ruined flesh is showing concerning irregularities in temperature and fluid composition. But he's alive. He's functional. And he's finally, after 777 years, beginning to process what has happened to him. The rage that fueled his initial assault begins to subside, replaced by confusion and concern. He has no idea where he is, no idea how long he's been in stasis, no idea where his chapter is or why he was abandoned here. His memory of events before stasis is fragmented, unclear. He needs answers. But first, He needs to assess his situation and determine his immediate priorities. He runs a comprehensive diagnostic, something he should have done upon awakening, but didn't have time for due to the urgent threat. The results are not good. System failures and desperate measures. The diagnostic readout that scrolls across ancient Marcarius's optical displays paints a grim picture. Fully 63% of his systems are operating at reduced capacity or have failed entirely. His assault cannon ammunition feed is jammed and cannot be cleared without external maintenance. His power fist generator is operating at 28% efficiency and losing coherence rapidly. His secondary weapons are depleted or offline. His armor integrity is compromised in multiple locations. His mobility servos are degraded and showing signs of imminent failure. Most concerning of all are the warnings from his sarcophagus systems. The amniotic fluid that sustains what remains of his organic body is contaminated with particulate matter, possibly from damage sustained during excavation or combat. Temperature regulation is failing. Neural interface connections are showing intermittent failures. His life support, the single most critical system keeping him alive, is in danger of cascading failure. In short, he's dying. Not immediately, not in the next few minutes or even hours, but without maintenance and repair, his remaining systems will fail one by one until the sarcophagus can no longer sustain life. Days, perhaps, maybe a week if he's fortunate, but no more than that. This knowledge brings a strange sense of calm. He's been dying since the moment he was interred in this chassis, really. Dreadnought existence is a long, slow death, punctuated by brief moments of combat. The only question has ever been when the end would come, and whether it would be in battle or in the cold silence of failed machinery. But he's not ready to die yet. Not like this. Not abandoned on some forgotten world, surrounded by Xeno's filth, his fate unknown to his chapter or the wider Imperium. If he's going to die, it should be in battle against the Emperor's enemies. It should mean something. It should be remembered, which means he needs to survive long enough to make his death matter. First priority, understand his situation. Where is he? What world is this? How did he come to be buried here? He accesses his internal chronometer, expecting to find that days or perhaps weeks have passed since he entered stasis. The number that appears in his displays is incomprehensible at first. He runs the diagnostic again, thinking there must be an error, but the number doesn't change. 283,705 days, 777 years, 1 month, and 14 days. For a moment, the implications of this refuse to process. 777 years, nearly 8 centuries. The entire Dreadnought existence he remembers, the 2 centuries of service before that final battle, all of that would fit nearly 4 times into the period he's been asleep. It's not possible. It can't be. No one would leave a Dreadnought in stasis for that long. No one would abandon a warrior of his experience and capability for nearly 8 centuries. But the evidence is undeniable. His systems don't lie. The chronometer records are absolute. He has been in stasis for 777 years. Everyone he knew is dead. Every battle brother who fought beside him is gone. His chapter master, who blessed his interment, has been dust for centuries. The tech marines who performed his last maintenance are long since departed. Even the chapter itself might not exist anymore. Chapters have been destroyed in less time. They've been corrupted, decimated, declared excommunicate traitoris, and erased from imperial records. For several seconds, ancient Marcarius simply stands motionless, his consciousness reeling from the implications. 777 years. The Imperium he remembers is gone. The galaxy he knew has changed. Everything that gave meaning to his existence might no longer exist. Then his training reasserts itself. He's a space marine. He's been trained to face impossible situations, to endure mental trauma that would break ordinary humans, to maintain function even when hope seems lost. The fact that everything has changed doesn't alter his fundamental purpose. He serves the Emperor. He fights the Emperor's enemies. He upholds the honor of his chapter, whether that chapter still exists or not. First things first, he needs to establish his location and situation. He accesses his internal cogitator, searching for any data that might have been stored before stasis. The records are fragmentary, damaged by time, or perhaps by whatever battle led to his burial. But he finds something. Marcos Prime. That's where he is, or where he was when he entered stasis. The name triggers fragmentary memories, an Ork invasion, months of combat, a final assault on their stronghold, damage, stasis, nothing after that. He tries to access external communication channels. His Vox. Systems are damaged, but functional enough for basic transmissions. He cycles through standard Imperial frequencies, searching for any sign of friendly forces. He broadcasts his identification codes, old protocols from an era nearly 8 centuries past, hoping someone might still recognize them. Nothing. Just static and silence. Either there are no Imperial forces within range, or his Vox system is too damaged to receive responses. He needs information. He needs to understand what has happened to this world, to this sector, to the Imperium itself. The Orks clearly have a substantial presence here if they were conducting major excavation operations. But where there are Orks, there are sometimes Imperial forces fighting them. His optical sensors scan the horizon, looking for anything that might provide direction or purpose. The excavation site extends in multiple directions, evidence of extensive Ork mining operations. In the distance, he can see what appears to be a settlement of some kind, crude structures built from salvaged materials in the typical Ork style. Smoke rises from multiple locations, probably from furnaces or vehicles. That settlement would have communications equipment. It would have maps, coordinates, possibly even captured Imperial technology that might provide information about the current state of the sector. It would also be heavily defended, likely home to hundreds or thousands of Orks. In his current condition, attacking it would be suicide. His weapons are depleted. His armor is compromised. His systems are failing. He might kill dozens or even hundreds of Orks, but he would fall eventually, and his death would accomplish nothing. But what choice does he have? Without repairs, he'll die within days. Without information, he can't locate Imperial forces or determine how to make his remaining time meaningful. The settlement is his best, perhaps only, chance. He takes a moment to perform emergency repairs on what systems he can access. He purges contaminated amniotic fluid and replenishes from his emergency reserves, buying himself a few extra hours of stable life support. He reroutes power from non-critical systems to reinforce his mobility servos, sacrificing sensor range for the ability to move. He locks out damaged sections of his neural interface to prevent cascade failures, accepting the resulting loss of fine control. It's battlefield triage on himself, performed through nothing but will and knowledge of his own systems. It's not enough to restore him to full function, but it might be enough to keep him alive and mobile for what comes next. He begins moving toward the settlement, his damaged legs carrying him across the scarred landscape with agonizing slowness. Each step requires conscious effort. Each movement sends new warnings cascading across his displays. But he continues, driven by the simple stubbornness that has kept him alive for centuries. He is ancient Marcarius. He has served the Emperor for nearly a palm, Millennium. He has fought in countless battles, faced impossible odds, endured suffering beyond mortal comprehension. And he is not going to die forgotten on this forgotten world, abandoned by time and circumstance. If he's going to die, it will be in battle. It will be with honor. It will matter. The Orks in that settlement don't know it yet, but they're about to face something they've never encountered before. A Dreadnought, with nothing left to lose, and everything to prove. Aftermath and implications. But let's pause before ancient Marcarius reaches that settlement. Let's consider what has actually happened here and what it means for the galaxy at large. A Dreadnought, one of the Imperium's most revered warriors, has been lost for 777 years and then recovered not by loyal servants of the Emperor, but by Orks. From a certain perspective, this is a minor incident in the vast scope of the galaxy's endless wars. One Dreadnought, one band of Orks, one forgotten battlefield. There are countless similar stories unfolding across thousands of worlds at any given moment. But from another perspective, this represents something profound about the nature of the Imperium and its struggles. How does a chapter lose track of one of its most precious warriors? How does a venerable Dreadnought, a being that should be revered and carefully monitored, simply disappear from records for nearly 8 centuries? The answer lies in the fundamental nature of the Imperium itself. It's vast beyond comprehension, its bureaucracy is labyrinthine beyond navigation, and its records are fragmentary beyond repair. The Imperium spans 1 million worlds across a galaxy too large for human minds to fully grasp. Communication relies on psychic messages carried through a dimension of madness, and even those messages can take weeks, months, or years to arrive. Records are lost constantly to enemy action, to clerical error, to simple degradation of ancient data storage media. In the specific case of ancient Macarius, the sequence of failures that led to his abandonment becomes clear in retrospect. The battle ended. He was damaged and placed in emergency stasis while waiting for transport. The warp storms hit before that transport arrived, cutting off all communication. The temporary shelter was buried by time and geology. The records of his location were lost in the chaos following the warp storms. The chapter assumed he had been recovered. The local Imperial forces, what few remained, never knew he was there, and so he slept, forgotten, while centuries passed above him. It's a tragedy, but it's also depressingly common in the Imperium. Warriors are lost to bureaucratic failures, perhaps as often as they're lost to enemy action. Equipment is misplaced. Entire regiments are forgotten in transit. Worlds fall out of communication and are only rediscovered generations later. The Imperium is too big, too chaotic, too overwhelmed by its own complexity to function with any real efficiency. But what happens next is what matters. Ancient Macarius, awakened by chance and violence, is now loose on an Ork-held world. His chapter, assuming it still exists, has no idea he's alive. The local Imperial forces, if any exist, don't know he's here. He's completely isolated, cut off from any support or guidance, operating on doctrine and protocols that are nearly 8 centuries out of date. And yet, he represents a significant asset. Venerable Dreadnoughts carry vast amounts of tactical and strategic knowledge. Their experience spans centuries of warfare. Their perspective on combat is informed by battles fought long before the current generation was even born. If ancient Macarius can survive, if he can somehow make contact with Imperial forces, if his knowledge and experience can be recovered and utilized, he could provide invaluable intelligence and capability. The Orks, meanwhile, have lost their chance to loot an incredible prize. Had they been more careful, had they not triggered the emergency awakening protocols, they might have successfully breached the Dreadnought's armor and gained access to sophisticated Imperial technology. A mech boy with the skills and time to carefully disassemble a Dreadnought could learn a tremendous amount about Imperial engineering. The components alone would be worth a fortune in Ork society, but they were too aggressive, too eager, too characteristically Orky in their approach. They woke the warrior inside, and that warrior killed dozens of them before they even understood what was happening. Now they have a rogue Dreadnought moving through their territory, a threat that needs to be dealt with before it causes more damage. This raises an interesting question. What happens when an entire Ork warband mobilizes to hunt down a single Dreadnought? Orks have fought Dreadnoughts before, of course. They've developed tactics for dealing with them, mostly involving overwhelming firepower and reckless bravery. But those encounters usually happen in the context of larger battles, with the Dreadnought supported by other Imperial forces. A lone Dreadnought, damaged and depleted, operating without support or resupply, is a different scenario. It's still dangerous, still capable of killing many Orks, but it's also vulnerable in ways that a properly supported Dreadnought wouldn't be. And Orks, for all their apparent crudity, are actually quite capable of adapting their tactics when they need to. The settlement Ancient Markarius is approaching will be warned about him. The fleeing Orks from the excavation site will have spread the word about the big metal Yumi that killed their war boss. The mech boys will be examining the bodies, analyzing the damage, trying to understand what kind of weapons were used. The remaining war bosses will be arguing about who gets to claim the glory of killing this intruder. By the time Ancient Markarius reaches the settlement, the Orks will be ready for him. They'll have assembled heavy weapons. They'll have positioned vehicles to provide mobile firepower. They'll have set up ambush positions and killing zones. They'll be doing everything their crude military doctrine tells them to do when facing a single, powerful enemy. Whether that will be enough to stop a Dreadnought with 7 centuries of combat experience and nothing left to lose remains to be seen. Historical precedents. When ancient and savage have met before. Before we reach our conclusion, it's worth examining the historical record of what happens when Orks encounter Dreadnoughts. While our specific scenario of a Dreadnought sleeping for 777 years is unique, the broader pattern of Orks facing these ancient war machines is well documented in Imperial records. The Battle of Iron, fought in the year 789 of the 41st Millennium, provides an instructive example. The Blood Angels chapter's home world of Baal came under assault from a massive Ork invasion led by the war boss Big Scorcher. The defense of Baal required the awakening of every single Dreadnought the chapter possessed, 41 ancient warriors who had slumbered for varying periods ranging from decades to millennia. Among them was venerable Astramael, a Furioso pattern Dreadnought who had fought in countless battles over 5 centuries of service. When the Orks breached the inner defenses, Astramael personally led the formation of Dreadnoughts in a devastating countercharge. The impact of 41 Dreadnoughts moving in concert, their combined firepower and melee capability unleashed simultaneously, shattered the Ork advance completely. But the victory came at a price. 3 Dreadnoughts were destroyed in the fighting, their ancient pilots finally granted the peace of true death. 5 others sustained damage severe enough that they would require years of repair before they could fight again. The Orks, despite their defeat, had proven themselves capable of bringing down even these mighty war machines through sheer weight of numbers and firepower. The lesson from the Battle of Iron is clear. Dreadnoughts are powerful, but they're not invincible, especially when operating without support, when their ammunition runs low, when their damaged systems begin to fail. They can be overwhelmed. The Orks learned this lesson well, and it informed their tactics in subsequent encounters. Consider the Ork invasion of Espandor in the late 41st Millennium. The Ultramarines chapter deployed multiple Dreadnoughts in the defense, including the venerable Dreadnought Barcus, a warrior whose service stretched back over 800 years. Barcus had fought in campaigns that had become legend, had witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations, had accumulated knowledge and experience that made him invaluable to his chapter. When the Ultramarines were forced to retreat from an untenable position, Barcus volunteered to provide rearguard action. He positioned himself at a critical choke point and held it against wave after wave of Ork attackers. For 3 hours, he fought alone, his weapon systems firing continuously, his chassis taking damage from thousands of impacts, his systems slowly degrading under the sustained assault. He bought enough time for the Ultramarines to successfully withdraw, saving the lives of hundreds of his battle brothers. But the cost was his own existence. When Imperial forces returned to reclaim the position days later, they found Barcus's Dreadnought shell, empty ammunition magazines scattered around it, armor breached in dozens of places, systems completely burned out from sustained operation. The warrior inside had finally found peace. his sacrifice recorded in the chapter's annals as an example of the ultimate devotion to duty. The death of Barcus demonstrates another important truth. Dreadnoughts, for all their power, have limits. They run out of ammunition, they overheat, their systems fail, and when they're isolated without support or resupply, those limits become lethal vulnerabilities. The Orks, through bitter experience, have learned to exploit these vulnerabilities. There's a particular Ork tactic that has emerged over the millennia, one that Imperial forces call the mob rush. When Orks identify a dreadnought operating alone or separated from support, they deliberately sacrifice waves of boys to deplete its ammunition. The first wave dies to the assault cannon. The second wave dies to the secondary weapons. The third wave closes to melee range and begins attacking the armor with choppers and power claws. By the time the fourth or fifth wave arrives, the dreadnought's ammunition is exhausted, its armor is compromised, and its systems are beginning to fail. It's a brutally effective tactic, though it requires a willingness to accept massive casualties that few other species could stomach. But Orks don't think about casualties the way humans do. Each Ork who dies in the mob rush is, from their perspective, dying in glorious combat. And the Orks who eventually bring down the dreadnought earn tremendous status within their warband. The Iron Hands chapter has documented a particularly concerning evolution of this tactic. After losing several dreadnoughts to Ork mob rushes, chapter librarians studying the battles noticed something disturbing. The Orks were learning. Each subsequent encounter showed more sophisticated tactics. The Orks were spacing their waves to allow the dreadnought's weapons to cool between attacks, maximizing the ammunition expenditure. They were targeting specific vulnerable points rather than attacking randomly. They were using terrain more effectively to approach undercover. This learning isn't the result of formal training or military doctrine. It's the result of Orks who survive encounters with dreadnoughts, growing larger and more dominant within their society, bringing their hard-won knowledge with them. The Ork who survives fighting a dreadnought becomes a nob. The nob who kills a dreadnought might become a war boss. And war bosses who have personally fought these ancient war machines share that knowledge, not through formal instruction, but through the example of their tactics in subsequent battles. There's also the question of what happens when Orks successfully loot a destroyed dreadnought. While mech boys generally can't recreate the sophisticated technology that makes dreadnoughts function, they can certainly salvage components for use in their own creations. Dreadnought armor plating finds its way onto Ork vehicles. Power fist generators are repurposed to enhance melee weapons. Targeting systems are stripped out and installed in Ork walkers. The most concerning development in this regard was documented in the Sharadon sector, where an Ork mech boss named Orkimedes developed a reputation for creating particularly sophisticated war machines. Imperial intelligence eventually determined that Orkimedes had access to multiple destroyed dreadnoughts and was using their components to enhance Ork technology to an unprecedented degree. One of his creations, a massive Def Dread that incorporated dreadnought armor plating and power systems, proved nearly impossible for Imperial forces to destroy. It took a sustained bombardment from multiple Lehman Russ tanks to finally bring it down, and even then the mech who piloted it survived and was able to rebuild. The fact that Orkimedes remains at large, continuing to create enhanced war machines, represents a significant ongoing threat. These historical examples all share a common thread. Dreadnoughts are powerful but vulnerable when isolated. They can achieve tremendous things in the right circumstances, but they can also be destroyed when those circumstances turn against them. Ancient Markarius, damaged and alone on an Ork-held world, represents the most extreme version of this vulnerability. But history also shows us that dreadnoughts in desperate circumstances often achieve their greatest feats. There's something about being pushed to the absolute limit, about having nothing left to lose, that brings out the full potential of these warriors. Barcus's last stand saved hundreds of lives. Astromale's charge broke an invasion that threatened to destroy his chapter's home world. Countless other dreadnoughts have turned the tide of battles through sheer determination and refusal to yield. The question, then, is whether ancient Markarius will join the ranks of those legendary last stands. Will his final battle be recorded in the annals of Imperial glory? Or will he die alone and forgotten, his sacrifice known only to the Orks who kill him? History suggests both outcomes are possible. The tragedy is that, given the state of Imperial record-keeping and the chaos of constant warfare, even if he achieves something truly remarkable, there's a strong chance it will never be recorded. Heroes die unsung every day in the Imperium. Dreadnoughts fall without anyone to witness their final moments. Sacrifices are made that save countless lives, but those lives never know who saved them. This is the bitter reality of warfare in the 41st millennium. Individual heroism matters, but it's rarely acknowledged. Individual sacrifice changes outcomes, but it's seldom remembered. And warriors like ancient Markarius, who have already given everything to the Imperium, are asked to give even more, knowing they'll likely receive nothing in return. Conclusion. The eternal war continues. As we've explored in this deep dive, the scenario of Orks finding a dreadnought that has been asleep for 777 years represents something more than just an interesting tactical situation. It represents the essential nature of warfare in the Warhammer 40,000 universe: brutal, tragic, and ultimately futile. Ancient Markarius, awakening after nearly 8 centuries to find himself surrounded by enemies, represents every lost warrior of the Imperium. Every soldier who fought believing their sacrifice would matter, only to be forgotten by time and bureaucracy. Every hero whose deeds were recorded in archives that were later destroyed, leaving no evidence they ever existed. Every servant of the Emperor who gave everything and received nothing in return except more suffering and eventual oblivion. The Orks, in their crude opportunism, represent the forces that constantly threaten to tear down what the Imperium has built. They don't do this out of ideological conviction or strategic planning. They do it because it's their nature, because they were created to be weapons and remain weapons even millions of years after their creators are gone. They cannot be negotiated with, cannot be reasoned with, cannot be permanently defeated. Kill 1 billion Orks and their spores will produce 1 billion more. Wipe them out on one world and they'll appear on 10 others. The battle that's about to unfold, ancient Markarius's assault on the Ork settlement, will be desperate and violent, and ultimately meaningless in the grand scope of the galaxy. If he succeeds in killing hundreds of Orks before his systems finally fail, it won't significantly impact the Ork presence on Marcos Prime. If he dies in the attempt, the Imperium will never know he lived and died alone on a forgotten world. This is the essential horror of the Warhammer 40,000 setting. Nothing matters, and yet everything matters. Individual sacrifices seem futile in the face of galactic-scale threats. Individual deaths are meaningless when billions die every day across 1 million worlds. And yet, without those individual sacrifices, without those individual deaths, without warriors like ancient Markarius fighting on even when all hope is lost, the Imperium would collapse. The Dreadnoughts embody this tragedy more than any other aspect of the Imperium. They are warriors who cannot die, who must continue serving, long past the point where death would be a mercy, who are reduced to weapons with only the barest remnants of humanity. They're honored, yes, revered, certainly, but they're also pitied, feared, and sometimes forgotten. Ancient Markarius will not be the last dreadnought to be awakened in desperate circumstances after centuries of forgotten slumber. He won't be the last veteran of a bygone age to find himself in a galaxy that has moved on without him. The Imperium creates warriors and then abandons them with depressing regularity, not through malice, but through simple institutional incompetence on a scale that defies description. The Orks will not be the last enemy to stumble upon forgotten Imperial military assets. They won't be the last species to try to loot technology they don't fully understand. They won't be the last to learn, too late, that some salvage should be left buried and forgotten. And the cycle will continue. More battles will be fought. More warriors will be lost. More dreadnoughts will be sealed in stasis and then forgotten for centuries. More orcs will find them. Some will wake, some won't. The galaxy will turn, wars will rage, and nothing will change. But perhaps, just perhaps, ancient Marcarius's sacrifice will mean something. Perhaps the warning he provides by killing dozens of orcs will save the lives of Imperial forces somewhere else. Perhaps his last stand, whenever it comes, will inspire some other warrior to fight harder, endure longer, refuse to surrender when all seems lost. Or perhaps not. Perhaps he'll die alone and forgotten, his sacrifice unrecorded, his heroism unwitnessed, his final moments known only to the orcs who kill him, and who will care about it only long enough to loot whatever salvage remains. Either way, he'll have done his duty. He'll have served the Emperor. He'll have fought until he could fight no more. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, that's all any warrior can hope for. If you've enjoyed this exploration of what happens when orcs find a dreadnought that's been asleep for 777 years, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. We bring you deep dives into Warhammer lore every week, exploring the dark corners and forgotten stories of the 41st Millennium. What do you think would happen in this scenario? Would the Dreadnought survive long enough to make contact with Imperial forces? Could it take down an entire Orc settlement single-handedly? Or would the Greenskins eventually overwhelm it through sheer numbers? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But there are also stories worth telling, heroes worth remembering, and sacrifices worth honoring, even if the galaxy itself forgets them. Until next time, may the Emperor protect.